Assalamu alaikum, greetings of peace and welcome back to Salam Media, your home of humanitarian journalism with me, Shabnam Palesa Mohammed, and this very special edition of the show focusing on the art of justice. In our first segment, of course, we spoke with Dr. Nanda Subban, who's a prolific artist, and then we were in conversation with Prof. Heru and Faris Rashid from Indonesia, talking about a training program for young lawyers. And next up, it gives me great pleasure. It is indeed an honor to introduce one of my favorite people, a professor at my alma mater, UKZN, many, many years ago, and an absolute legend in the space of human rights law, street law, and access to justice for the vulnerable. Professor David McCoy Mason, it's been a long time. The last time we had you on Salam Media was 2019 with a CV longer than my arm, but I'm really happy that he's joining us again today. Prof, welcome to Salam Media.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everybody.
Wonderful. It's so good to have you with us. Of course, you're one of the very rare lawyers and law professors that understands the role of the arts as well in human rights. Can you talk to us about that? I remember I'd interviewed you in 2019 around that subject, and that was later used in a tribute to you, your 50 years in academia and in human rights law. Your perspective on the role of the arts in human rights law, Prof.
Well, I'm married to an artist, Fiona Kirkwood, who does a lot of human rights type art as well. But one of my favorite projects was developing the human rights wall in Durban, which was when they were demolishing the old prison. And I went to them at that stage, way back in 1990 odd. We had a fairly liberal mayor, Margaret Winter, and I said, I know you're going to demolish the prison eventually, but I want to put the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on the prison wall. And she said, that's fine, phone our Estates Department. So I phoned the Estates Department, and they say, hang on, Prof, we'll just get hold of the tenants who are the military police. I said, fine. They phoned me back an hour later. Sorry, Professor, the military police tell us that it's not consistent with human rights to put human rights on the wall of a prison. So I said, just tell me, who's the person in charge who said that? Colonel Verwoest. Right. I'm going to phone Colonel Verwoest. I phoned Colonel Verwoest. Colonel Verwoest, that you guys do not believe in human rights. What do you mean, Professor? Of course we believe in human rights. I said, well, I've got the mayor to be on ground prison, which we know later will be demolished, that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Oh, the wall, that's different, that's different. I said, well, it's not that different, but you can cause a very embarrassing situation for our country. I have
We seem to be struggling with audio there from Professor David McCoy Mason. I wonder whether he can, might have to put his camera off and maybe turn it horizontal so we can hear him better. I'm sure he'll be joining us shortly. And while we wait for him to come back online, let's have a look at this initiative that is supported by the International Legal Coalition for Palestine. And that is the second poster in our series of assets for this segment. And it refers to an initiative to show support for Palestine by endorsing the role of the International Criminal Court. So let's have a look at that poster. It's basically asking for lawyers, legal professionals, and justice activists to participate in a sit-in or a picket outside their courts or outside their bar associations or other relevant area to show support essentially for the work of the International Criminal Court. So that is our next poster, the third asset. It's called Justice for Palestine, Support for the ICC. We know, of course, through this article on Al Jazeera and other platforms, that there's been threats and intimidation and stalling techniques that have been used against Karim Khan, who is the prosecutor at the ICC, but also the staff of the ICC, sanctions being taken against the staff at the ICC. And we know the US also has what they call a Hague Act, meaning if any one of their accomplices are arrested, that they can, in fact, basically go on the offensive against the ICC. So that is an old show that I've done with Professor David McCord Mason in 2019. And then let's have a look at the Justice for Palestine Support the ICC poster, that segment 1 to David 3. So we're talking about that initiative. Sadiq, if you could please bring that poster up on screen. It's the very next poster after the one you've just shown. That's it. Justice for Palestine Support the ICC. A sit-in at The Hague will be held this Friday, 24th of October, with specific demands in international law. And we're calling on lawyers and justice activists worldwide to hold a sit-in or a picket in your country or on the day soonest to it in front of judicial court or bar institutions, holding your signs and placards. So there will be this initiative on this Friday, the 24th at 3 p.m. Central European Time at The Hague. And the core cause is, one, to support the International Criminal Court to carry out its role without political interference. Two, to lift all sanctions imposed on the ICC, the prosecutor, and its staff. Three, to expedite arrest warrants for political, military, and Navy officials, etc., who commit war crimes. And four, to ensure the unhindered and unconditional delivery of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. We're going to skip the link, but it is an Al Jazeera article, and you can find information around threats and intimidation being used against the ICC and specifically its staff. Let's move to the fourth asset while we wait for Prof. David to come back, and that is a Durban demo. So this will be a Durban-based initiative, and it's the very next poster, Sadiq. Durban demo in KwaZulu-Natal next Friday to support this initiative this Friday. Next Friday, the 31st of October, 3:30 p.m., a demo at the High Court in Durban, and we're asking lawyers to dress in their law attire and everyone else to bring a sign to support Palestine through protecting essentially the role of the International Criminal Court. International justice is an urgent humanitarian and moral obligation. Standing together as lawyers, legal professionals, and activists is an expression of our solidarity with the victims or survivors and our commitment to the principle of accountability against immunity. So that Durban demo poster you'll see shortly, there is a QR code for people to scan and sign a petition, which will be delivered to the International Criminal Court. So you will see this poster circulating on social media, as well as the one before this. So please feel free to share it so more people have access to this particular initiative, showing support for Palestine through supporting the International Criminal Court and protecting the role of the ICC in human rights and in humanity, essentially. Waiting to hear if Professor David McCord Mason is back with us, and if not, we shall proceed until he is. We've got one more guest after this, Carlos Amato, also a brilliant cartoonist. Prof is back with us. Thanks, Prof. It looks like your signal is much better. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm on my computer now, so it should be better. Can you hear me?
Wonderful. It's good to have you back. I've just highlighted this initiative to support the ICC, which is initially or essentially calling for lawyers, legal professionals, and justice advocates to hold a sit-in or a picket at a court or a bar institution in support of the ICC, but ultimately, of course, showing support for Palestine. Can we bring up that first poster again? Sadiq, I just want to hear your comments, Prof, on why it is important to support the ICC, as flawed as it is, not that this one, the next one, on the ICC Justice for Palestine. Why is it important, Prof, to support the ICC, as flawed as it is?
Because it is internationally recognized, and I was going to mention this earlier, but when you have attacks against civilian populations, whether it's by Hamas or the Israeli Defense Force, whoever it might be, or people in Sudan
or Congo, whoever does it, that is a violation of basic human rights. It's a crime against humanity, and the court is there for that. And the more, although it is only persuasive to the countries concerned, usually one tries to shame the country to do something. I was very proud, incidentally, that South Africa's case that was initially brought before the court was argued by 4 of my ex-students, each of them from the UN ambassador at The Hague to the other 3, 2 advocates and attorney were all my ex-students as well. So that was a legacy that I left behind. But I think that we should always support the courts wherever we can, even in our own country now. When we get people making attacks on the credibility of the courts, need to rally around and protect the courts to make sure they can dispense justice. And the international...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Sadiq, if you're still with us, can you remove this poster and show us the next one, the Durban demonstration, the one that we shared just now? This is an initiative. So this Friday is going to be the initiative at The Hague, and the next Friday, a Durban demo outside the High Court in Durban, calling for lawyers, legal professionals, and justice advocates to participate. And of course, there's also a link and a QR code to sign a petition in support of the ICC, which will be delivered to the ICC. And of course, our esteemed Professor David McCoy-Mason has signed this this petition. Prof, I think you can remove that poster. Let's come back to Professor David McCoy-Mason. Of course, Judge Navi Pillay, Prof, has confirmed, I think we can remove that one, that as part of a commission on genocide and confirming genocide in September already, that Israel has committed genocide on the Gaza Strip. So that's a very famous commission of inquiry through the United Nations delivered on the 16th of September 2025, a very comprehensive report that is, of course, completely denied by the apartheid regime of Israel, and basically rubbishing the role of the United Nations and of this commission. But Judge Pillay was quite clear, the chair of the commission, it's clear that there is an intent to destroy the Palestinians in Gaza through acts that meet the criteria set forth in the Genocide Convention, and the responsibility for these atrocity crimes lies with Israeli authorities at the highest echelons, who've orchestrated a genocidal campaign for almost 2 years with a specific intent to destroy the Palestinian group in Gaza. The commission also finds that Israel had failed to prevent and punish the commission of genocide through failure to investigate genocidal acts and to prosecute alleged perpetrators. Prof, how important are reports like these within the context of the fact that the perpetrators, in this case, the apartheid settler regime, not only denies the veracity of these findings, but rubbishes them and goes all out to commit even further acts of moral depravity?
Yeah, well, again, this is the last point I'm going to make here. Then I'm going to tell you about my trip to Gaza and to the West Bank, rather, 20 years ago, and what was happening then. Just to say again, there's no police force or anything that can do anything. But what you use is moral suasion. You've seen already in the UN, the states have been voting against it. You've got Palestine as a state now recognized by a number of countries. I think Australia, Canada, quite a lot of the countries, the Commonwealth countries as well, are also recognizing it. And the UN, when you see the votes at the UN, it's only, you saw what happened when the Israeli delegate went to go and speak at the podium, when just about all the other countries got up and walked out. You probably remember that on the Security Council as well. So you can only use moral suasion to do that. You have to rely, when you are trying to enforce some sort of crimes against humanity, you first of all have to exhaust your internal courts. So you've got to try and sue the courts in your country to see if they will hold them accountable. If they won't hold them accountable, then you can go to the international courts to do it. And again, that is what's done. But at the end of the day, the International Court doesn't have its own police force or anything. The only thing that can happen is the United Nations. And when you've got certain countries still got the veto, like the United States, for instance, then you have a problem there again, because they need to reconstitute the Security Council, which was based on the old colonial system, essentially. Okay, should I talk a bit about my trip because things haven't changed in 20 years as far as I've seen.
Absolutely. It was quite astounding to see a cartoon from 2010 from Nanda Subin, and nothing has changed. It's Netanyahu lying at the UN once again. But you've been there 20 years ago. Tell us about your experience and your reflections and parallels to where we are now, Prof.
Yeah, well, what happened was I flew Egypt Air to Amman in Jordan, and then I crossed over at the Allenby Bridge crossing, or King Hussein crossing, which is based on an old bridge built during the First World War, when the British were getting rid of the Ottoman Empire guys, Lawrence of Arabia and all those guys. Anyway, I crossed there and arrived in Jerusalem eventually, and stayed with a very friendly Jewish family, and I was with a couple of Jewish friends. I'd been invited to go to Hebron University Law Faculty to go and talk to them about clinical legal education and social justice. And myself and one of the other Israeli local Jewish professors decided we were going to take a taxi. We weren't going to go in a bus. And because the taxi driver was a Palestinian, living in Israel, we came across roadblocks. We've never seen so many roadblocks in my life. We kept there. They kept checking our papers, but eventually we got through. Going back, I'll tell you, it was much worse. But going into Palestine wasn't as bad as coming out of Palestine. What we then did was we crossed the bridge. Now the Jordan River, which forms the boundary, was very low because the Israelis have been pumping water out of it as well. As you know, they do a lot of irrigation and so on. But anyway, we got across, we drove through the roadblocks, we got into Jerusalem and walked around a little bit and so on. But the next day, we caught another taxi to take us off to the West Bank and to Hebron. Hebron, as you know, is a very sacred city for not only Jewish people, Muslim people, and Christians, because it's where you've got Abraham and Isaac, their remains, tombs are there. There's called a cave of the patriarchs, where all the tombs of these different people are. And we went across there. We got into into Hebron. There's one very light moment for me was when we went up to the law school. I was wearing my African shirts, which I normally wear, and which was a bit unusual, I guess, for that area. And the local law professor who was showing us around invited us to come to the law school. And their law faculty, 80% of the students were women. And I guess they thought I was a pop star or something, because I had this funny shirt on. So I arrived there. They all wanted to rush and take selfies with me. And they're not allowed to sort of stand close to Palestinian men, but they could do it with foreigners. So they all sort of snuggled up and took all these selfies and everything. But once we had done all that, we were then taken on a walk to where the market is in the center of Hebron. And the market area is right next door to a block of flats, which houses 600 illegal Israeli settlers. Because I think in those days, Hebron probably had about over 200,000 Palestinians living there. But you had these 600 guys in their sanitized block of flats. And as we were walking down the side of the market, we wanted to turn and go into the other side of the market. I noticed there was like a canopy over the top. And I just asked the guy, what is that for? They said, you know, what was happening was the Israeli settlers in that block of flats were pouring pots of feces and urine onto the Palestinians as they were going into the market. And they had to put a screen up to protect that. We then came to the end. Now you'd probably have to walk another 20, 30 meters to get to the other side of the market. But the road was closed, fenced off. It's okay for foreigners, and Israelis can walk across there. But Palestinians had to go back for more than a kilometer back around the block and to come down the other side as well. And then I met a woman there who was a Palestinian lady who was working in Israel. Remember, Hebron is only about 30 kilometers southwest of Jerusalem. And she goes to work every day. And one day she decided to take a jar of honey for her colleagues at work. When she arrived at the Israeli checkpoint, the guard there looked at the honey, prepared to stir it to look and see if there was anything hidden in it. He then picked up the jar and poured it all over her head, her clothes, and everything else. Now that was completely sort of dehumanizing. It really was. The other thing that really almost freaked me out, I mean, I was an activist under apartheid, but we never fenced off the roads. Here you see roads fenced off, separate roads for the settlers. You see villages, illegal settlements fenced off. Everywhere you went were fences. The last time I saw fences like that was when I went to Afghanistan, to Iraq rather, after the end of the Civil War. So that was a terrible thing as well to see. And you felt very uneasy at all these sort of checkpoints along the way. It was like an apartheid nightmare, if you like, to see that it had gone as far as separate roads for people and people fencing people to keep them out of cities and places as well. The conference we did was about access to justice and social justice, access to the courts and social justice, and I was able to talk about that. We had a very nice conference, but coming back again, we decided to go with a Palestinian driver back to Jerusalem and then carry on. And again, this time roadblocks, but much more secure now, as if we're going to smuggle something into Israel. Mirrors under the car. At one point, before we got to the main exit, the Jewish friend and I were separated. We were interrogated in two different rooms to see if we told the same story or not and what we were doing in Palestine at the time. And these are all young Israeli guys, like you see when you see all the news clips of what the IDF does. And it was just the way they treated you, it was just incredible. The local, ordinary Jewish people were fine. But when you got these guys in authority, like the IDF guys, and you get these sort of Zionist guys, ordinary Jewish guys, fine. But these other guys are just so radical, so hard, so unfeeling. It's just incredible the way they behaved. On the other hand, the Palestinians were wonderfully friendly and everything else. I didn't meet any Hamas guys, didn't even know too much about Hamas back in those days. But so all in all, I think the reason why we need a TRC, I don't know if you want to need to mention that very briefly, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Absolutely, Prof. I want to ask Sadiq if he can bring that poster up on screen before we talk about its relevance to Africa. And this is a conversation you and I have had. It's asset number 6, Sadiq, and it's a TRC for Palestine with a special focus on the relevance for Congo and Sudan. And we'll talk about why that's relevant. But Prof, essentially the TRC, as we have discussed, is inspired by South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, aiming to cure the systematic erasure or counter the systematic erasure of Palestinians' lives, dignity, and voices. and to create opportunities to, one, hear and document survivor testimonies on occupation, two, to educate audiences internationally on apartheid, three, to mobilize accountability and reparations for genocide, and four, to train young lawyers on how to use international law. So this is not a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it's a Truth and Restoration Commission for Palestine. Your thoughts and reflections as someone who's been involved in these processes and now all these decades later are seeing the application of a concept for Palestine that is also relevant for Africa.
Yeah, I understand why you're doing the restoration, but I think also you need to have a reconciliation situation as well, because you need to reconcile. People are told they're anti-Semitic because they don't like the Jewish guys. We're not anti-Semitic, we're anti-Zionist. That's what we are. But it's okay. You can have a peace process and a ceasefire. You need to have some sort of mechanism for stability after the ceasefire, if it holds. Then you need to have a reconstruction program. And then we also obviously have to do the restoration. But you need to also deal with the perpetrators, because you're going to have the perpetrators running around still doing things. So it's the same when we go into prisons. We don't only educate prisoners about their rights, we educate the prison warders about what they've got to do as well. So their responsibilities also, and the prisoners' responsibilities. If we go into schools, we don't just tell kids, these are your rights as a school kid. You've also got certain obligations. You need to do your homework. You need to respect your teachers, whatever it might be. And the same here. The problem is to get the perpetrators to actually confess and see what they were doing was wrong and a crime against humanity. And if you look at the African, throughout Africa, in traditional African societies, reconciliation and reintegration into the community is the usual way of settling disputes. They were using mediation and conciliation for centuries, long before the Western and countries started saying, oh, we must now try to mediate, or we must now try to do conciliation. Those alternate dispute resolution, that was being done for hundreds of years in traditional communities, and it needs to be done in Africa as well, particularly in Sudan, in Darfur, where millions starving, and then also in Congo, where there's this conflict between the rebels there as well. And you've got a very rich Israeli diamond merchant guy monopolizing a lot of the mineral wealth also that people need to take a closer look at.
That's correct. If I can ask Sadiq to please remove this poster, and maybe Sadiq, if you can show us the links to the Sudan and Congo articles to just reference what we're talking about here, is that there's evidence to show that imperialism, as represented by the apartheid Israel, is supplying weapons to the RSF in Sudan. And RSF is using the same template of genocide that Israel is. And of course, in Congo, as you've mentioned, that there are Zionist billionaires who are extracting blood diamonds from Congo that further perpetuates the suffering of the Congolese people. And so therefore, this TRC focuses on Palestine, but must highlight, of course, Congo and the Sudan. As an Africans, this is exceptionally important for us. Prof, what would you say is what we need to do differently in this TRC as opposed to the TRC on South Africa?
Well, again, the TRC has been a bit controversial because there's still allegations that the government was not wanting to disclose too much because some of its own members have been involved. But I think we have to try and make sure that all these processes link one to another. So you start with
It appears we've got a network issue there with Professor David McCoy-Mason, who's, of course, an absolute stalwart in the area of human rights and access to justice, and, of course, the role of the arts in human rights. I'm not sure if we'll be able to bring him back on screen. It does not look like it. We'll give him a 30 seconds to perhaps come back and just finish that thought. Of course, South Africa held a TRC, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was a valiant effort but flawed in many ways. And now, of course, what we are launching is the TRC for Palestine, a Truth and Restoration Commission for Palestine, that also spotlights the genocides in Congo and Sudan. Prof. Mason, I think we might have just lost the connection there, but we thank him very much for spending time with us. And after the break, we'll be in conversation with Carlos Amato, again, talking about the role of the arts in human rights and liberation. Don't go anywhere. Stay with Salam Media.